Are 3D printed homes the future of real estate? And what do you do when your buyer wants to send a love letter to the seller?
An interesting technological advancement and a potential pitfall to avoid this week on Talking Real.
Welcome back to Talking Real, brought to you by the Oklahoma Association of Realtors. This is episode 143 of Talking Real, and we are hunkered down, avoiding Icepocalypse 2020.
Icepocalypse. Geez, this came hard and fast, didn't it?
Yeah, it really did. Nabil, how's your day?
Day's going, well. I had a warm cup of coffee and I'm just like in a blanket perpetually.
Nice. Yeah.
At least the good thing is my power is on. So
that's good. That's good news. We've maintained our power. I think something like half the city here is out of power, and it's pretty wild out there. I've been sitting in the office watching tree branches fall out of my neighbor's tree this morning, and so I hope everybody out there is either you have power and all is well, or you are bundled up and holding out for the return of your electricity.
Right. I know we lost electricity for a little bit, or maybe like half the day. So, at least it was back.
Yeah. Well, it's not too bad.
Yeah.
We've just had flickers. We've kept our power, but most of our neighborhood and all up and down the main street that we live close to is fully out of power. So, hoping everybody gets over that pretty quick. So
hopefully.
Yeah. We've got an episode today, although not necessarily how we would plan it, but we're just forced to work from home. The power's been out at the office and everything else. So Nabil and I are meeting over the internet to be able to bring you another weekly episode of Talking Real.
Which is good that I have internet. I didn't have that yesterday.
Mine is like, the power flickers and it'll go out. So we're going to hold out hope that we actually make it through this episode. So
right.
We're just going to hit the ground running. So Nabil, you sent me something before we started that was kind of a cool article on something. And so I want you to kind of lay the groundwork. Tell us about mighty buildings. It's just kind of a cool concept that may be growing.
It is. And this is something that I think we talked about maybe last year. We just kind of mentioned it being like, hey, 3D printed homes might be coming into the market, et cetera, et cetera. And now they have. So this article that was about Mighty Buildings, which is a 3-year-old California-based company that their goal is to produce cheap, efficient homes to, solve the housing shortage. So, and they do this by constructing 3D printed homes.
Yeah, this is cool. We kind of looked into this, and they basically automate 80% of the construction process. And they're using 3D printed materials it's a lightweight synthetic stone that is proprietary that they use. Evidently, it has a higher thermal resistance than concrete. So it's very energy efficient. Mm-hmm. And they use robotics to add foam insulation and do a lot of the interior millwork, exterior finishes, stucco or paint. Like they do that through automation and robotics, which is pretty fascinating. And so they build it remotely through 3D printing, all this other stuff. Now they do have people that are hands-on to like install cabinets and stuff like that robots aren't necessarily equipped to do.
Right.
They basically say it's like building a car. It's like very similar to how cars are built right now.
Yeah, that's what they compared it to. I guess they're taking that assembly line approach and just assembling it together, and then they ship it to you. It's kind of crazy. They've already done a couple of houses in California, so this isn't theoretical anymore. They've already started doing this. Mm-hmm. Now, their main business model is to do kind of like the extra house on your property as a rental income, but it's out there, it's happening, and they've said they're working on bigger house models as well.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting. So they've got a 350 square foot, just kind of a studio. And then they've got a 700 square foot version. And then they've got some other prefab homes that aren't necessarily 3D printed like this, but they're like a kit home that you can get. But in terms of these, yeah, they make them, they bring it out there, and they use a crane to set it down and plug it in, and it's ready to go.
And plug it in. That's really what it is, right?
Yeah. I mean, so they do you can just order the house and like do all the extra work. So hooking it up to utilities, those kinds of things yourself, or they will do it for you as well. So you can go full turnkey, comes with just everything. And I mean, just like any other new home, it's just a completely different process. And yeah, really kind of cool, really pretty interesting. So
I wonder if they'll be able to Amazon Prime it to me.
Someday.
Free 2-day shipping.
Yeah, wouldn't be surprised. So again, this company is only out in California, but kind of a cool thing that it isn't just theoretical, like Nabil said. They've actually built a few of these. So check out what they're doing. It's just sort of an interesting new thing that we're seeing, that this kind of way to build a house didn't exist a few years ago. This is a new way to do manufactured housing that is just completely different. Seems to be cheaper, but good quality materials, sustainable, all those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. So yeah, taking less man hours to build, those kinds of things. So just kind of an interesting little article. We'll put a link to this in the show description and show notes, so you can take a look at that and see what Mighty Buildings is up to.
Yeah.
Maybe someday you can order your own 3D printed
Mighty Building. Yeah, it is pretty impressive. I mean, and then we went on their website and looked at their finishings and their pictures, and they look very impressive.
Yeah, we took some 3D tours of their houses, and yeah, kind of cool. Kind of a cool little alternative to other ways to build a house. Mm-hmm. So, especially where they pitched us as a concept to basically create a little rental home in your backyard, where it's an easy way to have that. You don't have to have somebody come in and build it. They build it, drop it off, and it's done. And then you can rent it out for extra income on your property. So they're really pitching it as a way to not necessarily they're going to build your primary residence, but more as, here's a good way to increase the value of your property, because especially in California where things are absurd, but that it brings in that extra income of having that rental property in the backyard, that kind of thing. So kind of interesting. Check it out and see if you think that's where the future of home building may be headed, even here in Oklahoma.
Right. And I guess that's why they focused on the little 300, 700 square foot dwellings, as they call it.
Yeah. So we're going to do a hard 180 here and switch to a completely different topic. We just thought that was kind of a cool thing to mention. But we wanted to talk about love letters. Nabil, is anybody sending you any love letters lately?
No, I don't get any love letters.
Me neither. My wife does send me nice text messages and stuff, but no real love letters.
Right. It's not handwritten, right? No, just electronic.
But this is something that happens in real estate, different kind of love letter. But what we've seen, and I don't think we've talked about this on the podcast before, but we saw basically an article essentially that came from NAR's Fair Housing Corner, where they provide, legal updates, things like that, specifically on fair housing. And it sparked my thought process, because I've had this almost exact question come through on the legal line. And so this is something that happens in Oklahoma, just like everywhere else. I'm sure many of our listeners have experienced this before and never really thought much of it. But this is a good thing to look at in terms of potential fair housing risk. And what we're talking about here are these buyer love letters that we're probably even seeing them more now, where you may be getting multiple offers on a property or something. And so the buyer wants to write a letter to the seller. So on top of just having their offer coming in, they also have this letter that details certain information to try to compel the seller to pick their offer.
Right.
So we wanted to kind of talk about this in the context of fair housing today.
Yeah, it's interesting, because when I read this, I was like, I guess that makes sense. Why would this be a potential hurdle or a problem? But, people use this, like you said, to convince the seller to accept their offer as opposed to someone else, Because really, it's offer A versus offer B. Maybe they're essentially the same offer, but they're hoping that this love letter sets them apart and be like, oh yeah, we like connected with this family, so we're gonna go this route rather than offer A.
Yeah. And, my first initial thought on it is that they're probably mostly pointless because at the end of the day, like these sellers don't know you, and a letter, I mean, it's a business transaction. So
Right.
whatever maximizes the amount of dollars in their pocket is probably what they're going to pick, barring some other factors like maybe a quicker closing, those kinds of things. But really what you typically look at is what gives me the most money, and am I going to take $1,000 less on my house because you wrote me a letter? Probably not. I mean, I think in most cases, probably not. But I get the inclination of wanting to do this. And of course, as a realtor, you're wanting to help facilitate the purchase of this property for your client. And so you don't want to tell them, no, we shouldn't do it.
Right.
But we're going to lay out a scenario here real quick that this article points to that I think is a fantastic scenario to kind of walk us through why this is such a potential fair housing pitfall that could get you in trouble. And so this is where we want to give you the tools to have that conversation with your client. So when they come up with this idea, completely understandable idea, to be able to explain to them why. And then also, if you are a listing agent, to kind of how to deal with it as well if you receive one.
Right.
And to maybe divert that.
Right.
So first of all, let's lay out this scenario. So somebody, a potential buyer writes a letter to the seller, and the scenario they talk about here is that the potential buyer writes to the seller that they can picture their children running down the stairs on Christmas morning for years to come in the house, right? So they're trying to create this compelling story of, we've got our children and we're going to raise them in this house and we're going to live here for a long time and they're going to have these wonderful Christmas mornings and all this. Mm-hmm. And so you're like, okay, that seems innocuous enough. But we've actually, in that scenario, triggered a couple different potential fair housing problems just by that one statement right there.
Yeah, it's just one statement. It's a very short letter.
It's a very short letter. That's all I want to know. Holidays are upon us, right?
Right.
And so what's the problem here? Well, one, the potential buyer has now revealed their familial status, but also their religion, by highlighting that, okay, well, they celebrate Christmas. Well, that tends to be maybe a religious holiday. So you are forecasting that you are of a particular religion. You've also said, well, all of my children coming down the stairs. Well, at that point now you've told them of your familial status. And so if the seller, with the help of a realtor in particular, makes a decision to go with that buyer based on that information, they've now discriminated against everybody else on the basis of familial status and religion, which are both fair housing violations. And so having that information that it should be objective, it shouldn't be based on this individualized criteria based on things like race, religion, so forth. But you've given them that information now. And so now you've set everybody up for a potential fair housing violation.
Yeah, which is, like I said, when I read this, I was like, yeah, I guess that does make sense, because that's exactly what happened. I mean, coming from a non-lawyery background, I feel like it'd be a tough case to argue, but it does open it up to potential liability in that sense, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think you've keyed in on something that is it likely that somebody's going to go file a complaint? It's hard to tell because who's going to know, right? You've got two parties, you've got the buyer and the seller are going to know, and are they going to tell on themselves or something? So sure, there's a low risk, but you still run into that problem of it is in fact a fair housing violation. And is this the kind of thing that it's a hot market, multiple offers, somebody does get upset who didn't get the property and they go file a lawsuit. And during that lawsuit, they get discovery and they get a hold of this letter, and now it becomes an issue. And that opens up our realtors to not only a fair housing violation, it's a code of ethics violation, it can be a real estate code licensing issue. So it's really a big can of worms. It's not worth it when there's a pretty good chance it doesn't do a lot for you anyway. And if it does do something for you, it's done it inappropriately. So then the thing is, how do we deal with that, right?
Right.
So one of the things is to really understand this concept, understand fair housing, so that you can educate your clients about the fair housing laws and avoiding these pitfalls. And that goes for both buyers and sellers. I mean, one, to be able to talk to your buyer and say, listen, we can't, the only thing the seller can consider are objective factors, which is basically that bottom line. What's in the offer itself that doesn't clue us into these things that are potential discriminatory issues. And so having that conversation. But then on the flip side, if somebody does send you one and you're the listing realtor, you need to have that conversation with your seller to say, look, I have this letter. I will do what you tell me to do, but my advice to you is to tell me to just get rid of it, to shred this thing, that we can't accept it because of the potential pitfalls that it has. And then we can all say in good faith, we haven't read it. And that goes for both buyers and seller realtors. Don't read these letters. If you get one and they want to give it on or whatever, my recommendation is just don't even read it, because then you can in good faith say, I didn't read it. I talked to them about the problems with doing this, but they insisted on sending it. So I followed my client's orders or whatever the case is, right? So you can set up that foundation for why you've done the right thing, everything you can. And that was the individual decision of that client to do it and not yours.
Right. And then you could also just say, I will not deliver it, right? As like an upfront policy thing, right? We, as a policy, we don't do the buyer love letters. And, that could just right there for your buyer, for your client, solve that problem right there as well. Now, obviously they might be like, why? And that's where the education comes into play. But that is a potential solution as well. Like, it's your policy not to do this. So, you stand by your policy.
Yeah. I think that's a conversation you could have up front when you're listing a property. You could include a term like that in your listing agreement of if, that the seller is agreeing up front that if one of these comes in, it gets shredded. I mean, that sounds harsh, but you have that conversation up front of like, this is a problem. Here's why. And so I'm protecting you, I'm protecting us. And we're just not even going to deal with these things. And then even beyond that, especially if you're the listing realtor here, is to document the reasons the seller has accepted an offer. This is why we do things like a net to seller sheet, right? This is one of the good reasons we would do one, is so that you've got this objective quantifiable basis to know that, okay, well, this offer's going to net X dollars and this other one's going to net X plus $2,000. So they're accepting the one that's worth more money, and making a note in the file of that conversation that's had, why they're accepting that particular offer. And so you're avoiding there being any issue of they're accepting it for wrong discriminatory reasons, but then you've also documented the reasons there are. So if there's ever a question, there's ever a complaint, you've got that backup documentation at the time that decision was made to say, look, I made notes where they liked the fact that this was, a conventional loan that was going to close 15 days faster, whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is,
right,
as long as it's that objective criteria based on those factors in the contract and not something else outside of that could be problematic.
Yeah, that's always good to document and justify what was done and why it was done.
Absolutely.
So a question that comes to mind, and how like challenging your lawyer brain.
You put me on the spot here.
So, say a client comes to you and be like, okay, well, how do we make, or realtors wondering, like, how do I make my buyers or my clients' offer stand out? People have resorted to this as one of the ways to do that.
Yeah.
But what?
You're laughing because I'm going to say something. They need to offer more money. I don't know what else to say. This is the deal though, right? It's a business transaction. It's not a who has the best feelings about the other party. I mean, that's crazy. It should go so far. I mean, okay. I'm not going to say it should, but there's an argument to even be presented why you would perhaps even not want to indicate this buyer and seller's names in a contract, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you've got a seller who is potentially the type of person who would discriminate against somebody, they could do that on the basis of perhaps race or ethnicity by making assumptions about a person's name, right?
Right.
I mean, you know, that's just the reality, is that a name alone could clue somebody in to then say, well, I'm not going to accept that one because based on that person's name, I can conclude that they are of a particular race or ethnicity, and I don't want to sell my house to somebody like that, right? And so that, like, just something like that is potentially a problem. And this is why as realtors, we've got to be very careful about these conversations we have, and making sure, again, that we're understanding when that seller makes a decision that there's a clear, documented, good reason for why they're doing it, that's objective, based on factors like price, bottom line, closing timeline, those same factors that are going to be in every offer, not based on some particularly discriminatory reason that they really can't consider. Because when they make that decision, then as the realtor, they brought you into that same lawsuit or complaint when it does get filed. And so you want to be able to justify that, and make sure that you've had those conversations. So, I mean, yeah, how do you make it more appealing? Well, it's a hot market and people got to pay up to get that house that they want, right? If you know there's going to be 10 offers on this house, then that just comes down to understanding and having that conversation of, okay, as your realtor, I'm doing this CMA. This is what I think here's some ideas of what the value would be. Here's what the list price is. And then you guys got to make the determination of, what are we going to offer here? And that means paying for the ability to win, right? And that's just, it's a competition, and you got to win on those objective factors. So I don't mean to be like downplaying like the idea of setting your offer up for success, but it really comes down to pricing, right? I mean, that's really, I think, at the end of the day, what are 95, 99% of sellers looking at? Maximizing money, right? And that's what I'd be looking at, is who's going to bring me the most money. So
right. Yeah. Why wouldn't you take extra money for your property that someone's offering?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So obviously that brings in appraisal issues if it's too high and all that, and so on and so forth. But that's where realtors are the experts on that kind of stuff, to best advise their clients on how to have an appealing offer within all the various frameworks we have to be in.
Yeah. Yeah. You did bring up an interesting point. I wonder if in the future they won't put names on the contracts.
Well, you got to have a name on the contract.
I mean, yeah. Well, once it's finalized,
right?
But like in the offer stages, I wonder if that would be a thing. It's very interesting.
It is interesting. I mean, it's something that we don't really talk about much, because I don't know. It's, again, it's hard to do, but do people make assumptions based on, well, they have, maybe it's a buyer and a seller, or two buyers that have different last names, or they've got a name that doesn't sound like it's just, would indicate somebody of a different ethnicity, something along those lines, or, a single buyer versus two buyers, where you make the assumption that one's married, one's not. So now are you thinking about familial status?
Right.
And then the seller goes and like looks them up on Facebook or something. Now, so they've seen pictures of them with their kids and whatever, right? So you can see how that can really lead to some real problems if a seller is making a decision based on something that's not objective criteria. So that's just sort of a word of caution. We've kind of gone out like down the rabbit hole there a little bit, but we got to take fair housing serious. We got to take the discrimination out and make sure that this is a business decision. And it really comes down to realtors explaining to their clients how that works and how to make good decisions on it.
Yep.
So
that's all it comes down to.
Yep. So anyway, just wanted to share that. Like I said, we've had that question come in on the legal line, and saw this article, and we'll put a link to this article in the description as well, so you can take a look at that. Because I think it's a good, instructive thing to think about that maybe a lot of people don't, and maybe you just never really thought of when you run across these things in the past. So there you go. Take that for what it's worth, and let's everybody do our part to end discrimination in housing.
That's right.
And with that, we're going to send you all packing out into the cold and ice and out of the studio. So Hope you guys are safe out there. We got that inclement weather, this crazy October storm. So be safe and hope your power comes on quickly. Although if you're listening to this, maybe it'll pass the time while you don't have power. You can listen on your phone and get back on Netflix when your power comes back up.
Right. Talking real is the best way to pass the time.
Absolutely. So thank you for joining us. Send us some feedback, or your questions, or your thoughts, or maybe if you've had a crazy buyer love letter experience, let us know that story by sending us an email. It's a podcast@OKRealtors.com.
And as always, share this podcast with a fellow realtor or someone in your office, someone that you think could find this information useful.
Absolutely.
And if you feel so inclined, hit those 5 stars for a rating, because we like seeing those 5 stars.
We do. So thank you so much. And until next time, we'll see you next Tuesday on Talking Real.